This is Jamie with Stonemaier Games, and for today's Sunday sit-down video, I'm going to talk about my top 10 favorite uses of maps in tabletop games. I'll jump right into the honorable mentions in a second, but I should say up front, actually no, I'll mention this in a second. So first honorable mention is Small World. I have played the new Small World of Warcraft, and I really like what it does with maps, where you just combine two different islands or multiple different islands, and how they create multiple different small worlds. Came very close to making this list. Seventh Continent, I decided not to include, and perhaps this will be the wrong choice, but I decided not to include games where you are building the map during the game. Rather, these are maps that are determined at the beginning of the game and you play out from there. So that is just a choice I made. I don't think it makes the map in Seventh Continent any better or worse. There are plenty of, like Seventh Continent, there are plenty of great games that have great maps that you build and discover as you play. Brass Birmingham. I think it's a great map. A lot of people mentioned this when I asked our ambassadors this question, what maps they really like. And they love the Brass Birmingham map. I agree. It's a really, really well-designed map. And that I should say here that I'm differentiating maps from game boards. Maps have spatial elements. They have specific locations on them. Very location-based. It's not just a game board. Like Viticulture, the Viticulture game board is a worker placement game board, or the position of the locations don't really matter. There is the differentiation between the different seasons, but in respect to each other, the locations don't matter. And there's no routes or anything like that. So that's a game board that wouldn't count for a map here in this category. Time Stories. Time Stories has some really neat maps that you use during the game. I considered it for the top 10 list, but I didn't think it belonged because your focus in Time Stories is really on each individual location, not the map itself, even though the map can grow in really some interesting ways. The Voyages of Marco Polo. This was really close to making the list because I think it's a really clever map. It's like half the game board is the map in Marco Polo, and there are some randomized elements to it. The only reason that I haven't put it here is that in Marco Polo, it has this weird thing where it doesn't always feel good to advance on the map because it means you often have to pay quite a bit to move, and the routes themselves have a cost. And so every time you move, it's almost painful to move, even though you're unlocking a new action in a new place because you're paying so much to get there, and you might actually have to back out of that location, paying the cost again. So as much as I love it, it has some pain points to it as well. Route has a great map. But I couldn't think of anything about the route map, and maybe I'm missing something big. Feel free to comment in the comments below. But I couldn't think of anything big about the route map that made it stand out from among maps. It just seems like a perfectly fine functional map. Great Western Trail. I didn't even consider this as a map, but it really is. Like the connection of different connection points and different buildings on the map, and how they grow over the course of the game as people are building new action spots along the routes and along the map. Is really, really cool. Really, really clever implementation of a map on Great Western Trail, especially how it is set, but it also grows during the game. And last, Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. This is another one that I probably wouldn't have thought of, but one of the ambassadors mentioned it as saying that the use of the map in Sherlock Holmes, even though you aren't moving around on the map really, you kind of are. I mean, you're saying I am here right now. But you're mostly using the map to solve mysteries, to say, that the crime happened here. Let's look at stuff that's nearby to see if that can mean something. And I really like that they just included a map in Sherlock Holmes and integrated it into the mysteries for that purpose. Anyway, long honorable mention, but I wanted to mention those games. And let's jump right into number 10, which is Pandemic Legacy Season 2. And really, I could put any Pandemic on here. I think the Pandemic maps are designed really well. And actually, Pandemic Legacy Season 2, it kind of goes against the rule that I said in that you're uncovering the map during the game. But it is a big part of Pandemic Legacy Season 2, and I really enjoyed that about it, that you start off with just a little. You don't know a lot about the world. The world has changed a lot. You've been isolated in your own little pocket of the world for a long time, and you don't know what the rest of the world looks like until you start exploring. You add these big stickers to the board to see what's out there. I really like that. But because it is a little bit of a cheat against what I said about Seventh Continent, I would also just say Pandemic maps in general, I think, work really well. And the Pandemic Legacy Season 1 map is really great because it evolves over time. I'll talk about that more in a second about it in reference to another game. But that is Pandemic Season 2, or Pandemic maps in general, at number 10. At number 9, we have one of the two games on this list that I own, and that is Clank. I really debated not putting this on the list because it is such a non-traditional map in Clank. You don't have different regions in it. Actually, just thought of El Grande too. Should have put El Grande on this list. But you don't have different regions. But adjacency and movement are key parts of how the Clank board works and the Clank map. It really is a map. Basically, in Clank, you are starting at the top of the board and you are working your way down through a dungeon and deciding how deep you want to go and which routes you want to take to gather a bunch of different treasures along the way, avoiding some monsters if you can, or fighting your way through monsters and going deeper and deeper and deeper to get cooler stuff. I've said this many times, but it feels like a tech tree to me. Even though it isn't a tech tree, it feels like the paths on a tech tree, where if I'm advancing this way, I'm choosing not to go over here as a result, and that means something. It means that I am looking over here and thinking, okay, what if I had gone that way? And at the same time thinking, this has meaning. I chose this path. This was the path that I chose, and these are the repercussions of that decision. Here's the consequences. Here are my actions now because I chose this path so far. I really, really like that. I also really like that the depth matters. You can go really deep and get an awesome treasure, but have a harder time running out. Or you can go really shallow and get a treasure that is just under the surface, making it easier to get above land and then out at the end of the game, so that you can have a good score. Also, one other element that I should mention about this is Clank is one of the great games, along with one other game on this list, that has used these different maps for expansions in a really great way. I would love to have a game in the Stonemaier lineup that uses maps in this way, so that we can just make an expansion that is just a new double-sided board, a new double-sided map. And I love in Clank that they are all double-sided. This is actually an expansion from the underwater expansion board. So I love that from a publishing standpoint, that if you have a variety of different maps, that alone can add a ton of replayability and a ton of potential for expansions. So that's number 9, the Clank maps. And number 8 is Risk Legacy. So I referenced this a second ago in terms of Pandemic. But in Risk Legacy, really, I originally wrote down Risk because as a kid, I loved playing Risk, and I really do like how the map works. I love that it's based on roughly the real world, an older version of the real world, but you don't have to kind of learn a new world as a result. You know what the world map looks like. But I love the idea of clogging entry points in Risk. I really like how the map is designed around that. Like in Australia, you don't have to have a ton of units in every country in Australia. You really just need a ton of units at the entry point where someone could get in, whether that's inside Australia or just outside of it, because there's only one country that connects to Australia. So you can build up a huge force there and kind of clog it up for other people who want to get in there. And that leads to a decision point in Risk. Do you go after one of those smaller continents with fewer entry points, or one of the bigger continents with a lot of entry points that you have to defend? But if you control it at the beginning of your turn, you get a lot of extra troops to further bolster your support of that area and to spread out. I love that. I really love how the map is designed to Risk. Risk Legacy, I think, took it to a new level because it started with that, but at the same time, the map grew and changed over time. Big things happened that are unique to our game and would be unique to your game, that can make certain areas really good or really terrible permanently based on the decisions that you've made in Risk Legacy. So I really like that element of an evolving map, a set really strong map that evolves over time and tells a story based on things that you do to that map as you play. So that's Risk and or Risk Legacy at number 8. Number 7 on this list is Terra Mystica. Terra Mystica, the map is not particularly exciting, but it is so well designed. Even the original map, which I think they reconfigured a little bit for the expansion, for maybe the backside of the expansion board, I think it still worked really, really well. Just what the designers did to space out different territories in Terra Mystica, I think was really, really clever, because the whole idea in Terra Mystica is that you have your home territories that are very easy to build on. But if you want to build on any territory that isn't your native terrain, you have to terraform it into your special terrain. And based on you look at this on your faction map, certain terrains are a lot harder to terraform into the terrain that you want. So you're always looking at the map to determine like how you can best either get to another territory that matches your home terrain by spending the fewest shovels on the territories that you need to terraform, or how you can expand out through shipping or through bridges to connect to easier territories. You're always looking at the spatial element, and I think they just really spaced out the hexes really, really well which I think is tough to do, especially with so many different factions and terrain types, 7 different terrain types, and then water on top of that to deal with. So I think it's just a really, really well-designed map, and that's Terra Mystica, my number 7. My number 6 favorite map in a game is Concordia. I actually just talked about these games on another list about the Board Game Geek top 11 through 20 games. Both of these games came up on that list. Concordia just has a really, really solid map that does something cool, I think, with the regions. So the map itself, and there are a bunch of different expansion maps in Concordia as well. I think it's just really well designed in terms of the different routes that connect different regions of the board, different countries, really. Or not countries, but whatever's below a region, districts. Because there are these bigger regions that are collections of areas on the board that you can control. And one of the actions you can take in Concordia is to have all players who are in that region produce. And so it's an action that has a positive player interaction because you are potentially doing good things for other players, but you get a special bonus if you are the one to have that happen. There's reasons in Concordia then to cluster together and control a lot of different things in one territory, because then when you produce there, you are getting most of the benefits from taking that produce action. But there are also reasons to spread out in Concordia. And actually, I should mention that about Terra Mystica. In Terra Mystica, another clever use of the map is that you don't want to be too far away from other players, because certain buildings cost less if you are next to another player when you upgrade basically to that building type. So I love that in games with maps where there are reasons to go off and do your own thing, but also reasons and ways to be a lot closer to other players. And I think the Concordia map does that really well. That's Concordia at number 6. At number 5 is Scotland Yard, the other game on the list that I own. I think I have the old original Scotland Yard map, and I just think it's really well designed. In Scotland Yard, it's a hidden movement game where up to 5 players are chasing after Mr. and Mrs. X, who is hidden on this map, and they are racing around the board through a system of spending either taxis, buses, or the loop, the subway, essentially. I love a couple of different things about the map. I love that you have these different forms of transportation that let you connect to shorter or longer distances, and that it's not always better to take the longest route or to use the subway, because you have fewer subway tokens, and especially if you're Mr. X, you might want to be sneaky and use a bunch of taxis so no one really knows where you are at any given time. Whereas they have more information if you end up using buses. They can say, okay, we know right now he's on a bus location. I also just like how the map is designed in general to have this river that runs through it, and how Mr. X can move along the river, or you kind of have to keep an eye on that. You kind of want to keep Mr. X away from the river if you can. And also, I know it's hard to explain, but there are just certain interesting parts of the board that are interesting to run around, like the different parks on the board. So there's these parks that don't have a lot of paths that go through them. So you might want to try to cut it off so that Mr. X can't run down here, because if you don't cut him or her off, it might be really hard to catch up. I just think this is a really well-designed kind of, not a route building map, but just a puzzly run around the board map on Scotland Yard. That's why it's my number 5. Number 4 is Clans of Caledonia. This is one that I've been playing on Board Game Arena a lot lately. And on Board Game Arena, you don't really see it happening. But in person, if you play the cardboard version of Clans of Caledonia, it has a brilliant map that you can put together with a lot of asymmetry to it. You're taking 4 different pieces of a map, and you're putting them together to form the core map that you're going to use to play the game. And aside from just the use of the map and how different territories cost different amounts to build on, every territory has a cost to build on it, and those costs differ widely based on where you are on the board. But I just love that initial system of putting together the board and having it make sense. And it really helped me figure out how to design the Scythe modular board when I played Clans of Caledonia, and when I thought about it. Because Clans of Caledonia does something really interesting with the way it puts rivers in the middle of the tiles. It has a bunch of hex, like these tiles are a bunch of hexes put together with rivers that run through it. And this was something that really puzzled me for the Scythe modular board for a long time, because I didn't want it to end up looking bad, basically, where certain bodies of water didn't match up with one another when you randomly push these tiles together. And I think Clans does that really well, where the water's kind of in the middle of the boards instead of on the edges. I think that was a really, really clever thing to do. And it really helped with the side modular board, because I ended up having a set board with certain things printed on the board that are set. And then you have, what did I say, is it four? Yeah, it's 4 tiles, I believe, that you flip over to either side and put those tiles on different parts of the board that help to form the board. And there's water that runs through the middle of those tiles, but not on the outside. So they kind of sync with the core board, rather than having a bunch of random hexes that you mash together and it ends up looking terrible. So I learned that from Clans, and I think Clans of Caledonia does that really well. That's why it's at my number 4 position on this list. Number 3. Number 3 is Ticket to Ride. I referenced this one earlier in terms of a game where they've generated a lot of expansions from Ticket to Ride, largely based on new maps. And this is, since Ticket to Ride is based in the real world, there are so many different maps that they can use. They can use, there's UK, there's Japan, there's the US in the core game, so many different countries. Scandinavia, I think they have some set there. They can have maps in all different areas and have slightly small differences based on each map. One thing that I really like about the Ticket to Ride maps in general is that for pretty much any city that you want to go to, there are multiple ways to get into it and to build a route into it. I think that works really well in that even if someone builds into a city and takes a path that you were hoping to get, there's still probably another way, maybe even multiple ways, to get into that city yourself and to find a way back through to your routes, whether you're trying to just create some routes and get points or complete those longer goals, those longer route goals. So I like that there's kind of always a backup plan, and whenever someone does build into a city, it puts a little pressure on you to focus on it and build out of it if you really need to get into that city. I just think the boards are designed really, really well to do that in Ticket to Ride. I'd love to hear your favorite map in Ticket to Ride in the comments below. I think a few people mentioned the United Kingdom when I posed this question to our ambassadors. I have played that one, and I've played the US one. I think I've only played those 2. And I think I preferred the US map a little bit because the UK one added some complexity that maybe I wasn't quite ready for at the time when I played it. But I really do enjoy the US map for Ticket to Ride. And that is at my number 3 on this list. Number 2 on the list is Kemet. I think the Kemet map is brilliantly designed. So Kemet is a game that is largely about combat, which is something that I usually stay away from. But the whole game focuses on that, and it doesn't feel spiteful when you attack someone. It's very easy for someone to recover from an attack, and everyone is pretty much equidistant from everyone else based on how the map is designed and what you can actually move through. There's some obelisks that can help you jump across the board, which I think is really, really clever. That inspired the tunnel system in Scythe that lets you use a set map in Scythe to cross, with these tunnels, to cross big areas of Scythe to connect you with other players. I got that from Kemet, because Kemet has these obelisks that let you jump across the board. And I just think the Kemet map works so well with how equidistant it puts all players. Puts all players in a good position no matter the player count. I no longer have my original copy of Kemet, but I am very much looking forward to getting my new Kickstarter version of the newest version of the game and see how they do the map in that version. I think it's new art, but I think it's largely the same system, and they're keeping players equidistant. Yeah, just check out the map of Kemet if you do have a game with a lot of fighting and interaction. I think you can learn a lot from how Kemet uses the map for that purpose. That's why it is my number 2 game on this list. At number 1 game is Near and Far. Near and Far from Ryan Lockett at Red Raven Games. It is just a really, really clever map system in the game. He uses a storybook kind of system, but there's no story in the book. The whole book is a map, and so every game that you play in Near and Far, you open the book, this big book, to a new page spread, and that is the map for the game. And so every place you go in the game is completely different. You don't know what's happening next if you don't read ahead in the book. And as you play each scenario, you get to really explore these maps and venture out. You're kind of exploring out from a central point on each map to I don't know, have encounters on the road, to place your little campsites along the way to get to certain things. There's a a little bit of a route building mechanism where you're trying to pair together two identical resources. And I love just how the road system works in Near and Far, and that you are in town, you're trying to get enough supplies and health so that you can go out on the road for a long time. But the more time you spend in town, the less time that you're actually out on the road doing stuff. I'm really excited about Sleeping Gods, which uses the same system for, I think, even more expansive exploration. And I think it's less linear, even though I didn't mind the linearity of Near and Far, and that you were always turning to the next page in the book for the next map. I think Sleeping Gods lets you choose different directions to go in, which I think will be really exciting to try out. But the Near and Far map system, I think, works really, really well. I think Ryan even told me one time that it is his favorite component that he's ever put in one of his games. And I agree. It's a wonderful way to offer a bunch of different game boards to someone as they're playing within one storybook, one big storybook. Let me see if I've covered all of my topics here. So, one thing that I didn't talk about on this list is, so I'm done with the top 10. I'm going to talk about a few design things real quick here and a few Stonemaier games. One is how different maps scale well for different player counts. Sometimes, like in Tapestry, we have a double-sided board. One side of the board is a little tighter. It's for 1 to 3 players, and you flip it over, and you have a 4 to 5 player board. I think that's one great way to scale game boards. Another way is to use the Kemet system or the scythe system, where you have just one board, but you have a way to easily jump across the board to get to the other player if you want to. I think this works really well too, because it means that in maybe 2 or 3 player game, if you are the types of players who want a lot of interaction, you can do that. You can jump across the board and have that interaction. Whereas if you are not the type of players who want that interaction, you can have your own little space of the board where you do your own thing. You don't have to worry about other players as much. It doesn't work as well as Kemet, because Kemet is a combat-driven game. But I think it works pretty well in Scythe for giving you the space if you want it, and if you don't want it, you can easily get to your opponent. Modularity is something that I didn't really talk about too much on this list. I think modularity has a fine balance in that I think it really comes down to setup time. So for Clans of Caledonia, which I mentioned as being kind of the top of the list for modularity, it's super easy to set up. You're just selecting 4 tiles, you're putting them together, you've got your board. There's some boards where you're putting out a lot of different little tiles as you set up. And it just takes a long time. I think it takes a little bit too long. And I don't think you always need that much variety in a game. The map doesn't need to be completely different every time you play. Even just small differences can make a big difference for replayability. So I think finding a sweet spot there for setup is pretty crucial in terms of modularity and variety in game boards. And I also think clarity matters. I ran into this a little bit with Small World. The Small World map is very clear, but I think one of the reasons I didn't put this on the list is that there's certain icons that are very easy to cover up with other tokens on the board. So if you cover up these icons, you are not seeing a fairly important icon that you need to see in the game. So I think that's both a map design and a component design to make sure that important information is easily conveyed. This is something that maybe we could have done a little bit better with the Scythe modular board, where the tunnels don't have the red outline around them to help you identify which hexes are tunnel hexes. So that kind of threw people off a little bit with the Scythe modular board. Let's see, I wrote down My Little Scythe. This is another game of ours that has an interesting map design. It's largely inspired by the Scythe board, but you have different regions that correlate to dice that you rolled to generate resources in different regions. It's a whole different mechanism, but I think the map is designed pretty well for that purpose. Also, some games that, not honorable mentions really, but games that I wanted to mention are Through the Ages. Through the Ages doesn't have a map at all, and yet it is one of the best civilization games ever designed. And I think it does a great job of giving you the feeling of building a civilization without having a map at all. So not a map at all in Through the Ages, but I thought it was worth mentioning here. Cartographers was a fun one that an ambassador mentioned, because in Cartographers, everyone starts off with the exact same map. It's empty. The whole point of Cartographers is to draw the best map in the game as you play. And so I didn't want to include it on this list because the map is completely empty when you start out, but it could have been on this list if I had been a little bit more flexible, because it is a game about drawing and making the best map. And last, Gloomhaven. I think Gloomhaven has a beautiful map, but I found in my experiences of playing it, the spatial element of the map didn't really matter. It's been a while since I played it, but as I remember, like, you could choose pretty much any location on the board that you had discovered and go there. So distance didn't really matter, and so the map itself ended up mattering a little bit less, as much as it added to the theme itself of Gloomhaven, because the map really is beautiful and evocative, and it makes you wonder and think, what's out there? What's in this location? It's just not a matter of the spatial element of it didn't seem to matter as much. So I didn't think I should put it on a list involving maps where the space and the correlation between different areas matters so much. But I could be wrong about that. I have not played I played like 6 or 7 games of Gloomhaven. So if the space between things on Gloomhaven on the map ends up mattering later in the campaign, feel free to let me know in the comments. I'm happy to stand corrected there. That's my list. I would love to hear what you think about the maps in these games. I'd love to hear some of your favorite maps that you have found in games that you've played. I'm sure I'm forgetting some great maps here, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks.